Hey everybody, just a reminder that we're giving attendees until 5 minutes after 1 to come in and then we'll start. For everyone that is here, thank you for your attendance, and we will begin the webinar shortly. All right, everyone, we are 5 minutes after 1. I think this is a good time to start. Again, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining NCDEQ for our Volkswagen Settlement Level 2 State Agencies Program webinar. I'm Stephen Rice, an environmental specialist for the Division of Air Quality and the Level 2 Program Manager, and I'm joined by additional DAQ staff who manage other aspects of the Volkswagen settlement. A few housekeeping rules before we get started. All attendees will be muted during this webinar. Questions can be submitted in the Q&A box and will be addressed during the question and answer time if not covered in the presentation. The raise hand feature will be disabled until the question and answer time and will only be considered for those who called into the webinar by phone. For those calling in, pressing *3 will raise your hand, and pressing *3 again will lower your hand. For all other attendees, they must use the Q&A box to submit their questions. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the DAQ VW website at a later date. Finally, we have 2 hours scheduled to discuss the program and the application process, but if we complete everything and answer all questions with time to spare, we have the option to adjourn early. If we are not able to answer all of your questions by the end of our time, we will let you know how to get your questions to us. When today's presentation becomes available on the DAQ Level 2 website, be aware that links found in the slides will only be active when used in presentation mode. So today's webinar will cover an overview of the Level 2 State Agencies program and its application process, information on when and how to submit your application, information on what happens to your application once it is submitted, information on where to find answers after this webinar, and a time for questions and answers. I would like to remind attendees that this is not a public forum for comments on the implementation of the Volkswagen settlement. The RFP for the Level 2 State Agencies program was released on February 28th. The Level 2 program overview found in the RFP states that NCDEQ is allocating the full 15% allowed in the VW State Trust Agreement for Zero Emission Vehicle, or ZEV, infrastructure projects outlined in the NC Mitigation Plan. NCDEQ will give 70% of the Phase 2 ZEV infrastructure allocation to DC fast charging, and the rest, the 30%, to Level 2 charging infrastructure projects. This RFP has just over $1 million available for funding of new Level 2 charging stations for state agencies and state-managed attractions. The primary goal is to increase use of ZEVs in place of gas-powered cars to mitigate nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, and greenhouse gas emissions in the state. To achieve that goal, the program will emphasize adding new ZEV charging infrastructure in underserved areas, extend the existing light-duty ZEV infrastructure across the state, encourage intrastate and interstate ZEV vehicle usage at North Carolina's diverse geographic, historic, and tourist attractions, and highlight the environmental benefits of ZEVs. The application for the state agency's program will be available in the Grant Management System, or GMS, on April 1st, and applications for this program are due on May 31st. The state agency's program will assist interested state agencies and state-managed attractions in applying for funds to install light-duty ZEV Level 2 charging infrastructure as described in the North Carolina Volkswagen Mitigation Plan. In Phase 1, state agencies were able to apply for Level 2 rebates, but did not have their own program. And we came to find that the general Phase 1 requirements could make it difficult for state agencies to apply and carry out a project. Out of the 79 agreements for Level 2 projects in Phase 1, only 8 organizations had the classification of state government. While these are still great projects, we were eager to get feedback and suggestions so that we could create more opportunities for Level 2 charging in Phase 2. I will discuss the changes from Phase 1 to Phase 2 for state agencies throughout today's presentation, but something that hasn't changed that I want to mention right off the bat is that just like the Volkswagen Diesel and DC Fast programs, this Level 2 program is a reimbursement program. Applicants must be willing and able to purchase and install Level 2 charging equipment using their own funds. Here we see all the available funding for ZEV programs in Phase 2. The state agency's program is the first Level 2 program to have its RFP released, but more importantly to you, it commands about 1/3 of the total Level 2 funding with just over $1 million to distribute. So, who is eligible to apply for state agency program funding? In short, this program is designed for and limited to NC state government agencies and state-maintained attractions. Government is defined in the RFP as a North Carolina state government agency, institution, or attraction supported by state funds. Please note that state agencies are subject to using contractors approved on the Department of Administration's statewide term contract 691A, electric vehicle charging station equipment, accessories, installation, and infrastructure. Also, project applications can be submitted by public-private partnerships, where the lead applicant represents a state agency or state-maintained attraction. The RFP identifies 4 locations that are eligible for Level 2 ZEV charging infrastructure funding: government-owned property, government-leased property, state parks, and state museums and other state-maintained attractions. Please note that if the government property is leased, it must have at least 5 years remaining on that lease from the date of project contract execution, and the property site owner must approve the project. The type of access and charger used in a project will determine the maximum percentage of total project cost reimbursement. If a project offers public access and network chargers, it can be reimbursed up to 100%. If a project offers public access but uses non-network chargers, it can be reimbursed up to 80%. And if a project is not publicly accessible and uses non-network chargers, it can be reimbursed up to 60%. Please be aware that multiple project types cannot be incorporated into a single application, and that public access chargers must be accessible during site or attraction business hours to the general public without restriction. If you are applying for a public access project, you must attest to this requirement in the project details page of your application. Like all Volkswagen programs, there are a number of project and site requirements that should be considered before you apply for funding. For example, each project must have a minimum of 2 ports. There can only be 1 application per charging location at any given time, and chargers must be maintained and operated for a minimum of 5 years from the date of a project completion. The full list of project requirements is found in the state agency's RFP. There are a number of site requirements from Phase 1 that have carried over into Phase 2. I mentioned earlier about an applicant needing a letter from the landowner approving the project if the site is not owned by a state government entity. And here we can see that we still require 1 designated and clearly marked EV parking space per port identified in the application. The full list of site requirements is also outlined in the RFP. A new aspect of this Phase 2 program is focused on charger accessibility. Applicants who require to provide handicapped accessible parking spaces within their parking area by the Fair Housing Act or Americans with Disabilities Act architectural design standards must meet those requirements for EV charging spaces as provided in the RFP. In general, we ask applicants to consider accessibility, ease of use, safety, adequate space for exiting and entering the vehicle, unobstructed access to the charger, free movement around the charger and connection point on the vehicle, as well as clear paths and close proximity to any building entrances. The VW State Mitigation Trust Agreement states that trust funds may be used on costs necessary for and directly connected to the acquisition, installation, operation, and maintenance of new light-duty ZEV supply equipment. The following items are all considered eligible expenditures, and this list plus a list of ineligible expenditures are both found in the state agency's RFP. So now that we've covered the background and requirements of the state agency's program, let's transition into the process of submitting an application. Thankfully, not much has changed here either between Phase 1 and Phase 2, but we'll still cover the process from beginning to end, starting with the fact that NCDEQ will still only accept applications submitted through the NCDEQ grant management system. Prior to using the grant management system, applicants must obtain an NCID and then complete and submit the Online Enterprise Business Services External Request Application. This request application is an updated version of the GMS Access Authorization forms from Phase 1 and makes the process of gaining access to the GMS easier than before. While you complete the request application, you should also complete and email the State of North Carolina Substitute W-9 form to daq.nc_VWgrants@ncdiner.gov. At this point, you may feel a bit overwhelmed with all the procedure and information needed just to apply. Especially if this is your first time applying for VW funding, you are definitely not the only one feeling this way. To help make sure all application requirements are being met, we have created an application checklist which covers general requirements plus requirements specifically for this Level 2 program. The link to the checklist is found in this slide and on the DAQ Volkswagen website. All documentation must be included when submitting an application for that application to be reviewed. To request access to the DAQ Grants Management System, you will first need an NCID. In this slide, I've provided links for NCID registration, as well as how to create an NCID guide. And I will walk through the steps of creating an NCID after the next slide. Some important NCID information. If you already have an individual or government NCID, there is no need to create a new NCID. If you are a current user of the NCDOT grant system, you do not need a new NCID and can use your current EBS username on the GMS Access application. Also, once you have completed an NCID request, you will receive a new NCID user registration email from ncid.notifications@nc.gov. You must click the link in that email and follow the instructions to complete the registration of your NCID before submitting the GMS Access Authorization request. To begin the process of creating an NCID for GMS Access, you need to go to ncid.nc.gov and click the Register link, which is highlighted in this slide. Before we go any further, some people may be wondering, in a webinar for state agencies, who here would need to create an NCID? Well, as I said earlier, the NC state government agencies include state agencies, departments, institutions, public universities, and community colleges, and not all of these entities have a standard practice of issuing NCID. Also, third parties wanting to access the GMS will need an NCID, but we'll talk more about them later. So after clicking that register link, you'll be taken to new user registration page where you'll click the individual NCID option. Now you'll enter in information into the text fields. There are no requirements on what your NCID username should be when it comes to the grants management system, but in general, it should be easy for you to remember. When the required information is all entered, click the Continue button. Now the system needs to verify your information. A code was sent to the email address that you provided, which you'll need to enter here. Here is an example of that verification email containing the 6-digit code, which needs to be entered in the field from that previous slide. After entering the code and clicking Check Code, you'll receive a confirmation that your information has been verified. Click Continue to see the remaining steps. At this stage, you will need to create security questions and answers to activate your NCID account. Click the Continue button to complete this step. There are 5 security questions you'll need to configure for your account. Once the questions are selected and the answers are provided, click Save Answers. This completes the NCID creation process. If you experience issues with your NCID and or password, you'll need to go to the ncid.nc.gov webpage to retrieve your username, retrieve your password, or to unlock your account. There is a Need Help link on that page for other NCID problems or questions. It is our experience that your NCID password expires after around 90 days, and you should receive an email beforehand alerting you to this. So in a previous slide, I mentioned that the Enterprise Business Services External Request application is an updated version of the GMS Access Authorization form from Phase 1. When you complete the request application, you should also complete and email the State of North Carolina Substitute W-9 form to daq.nc_bwgrants@ncdnr.gov. Please note that just like in Phase 1, an organization can have up to 3 authorized users in the GMS at a given time, and that once the authorization is processed, you will receive an email from NCDOT IT SAP Support Services. Here we see part of that State of North Carolina Substitute W-9 form. This form allows DAQ to set up an organization with new GMS users in the North Carolina accounting system in order to receive reimbursement payments. For all new GMS users, we encourage you to submit the EBS application and the W-9 form as soon as possible. We also encourage you to fill in all documentation electronically versus by hand. So for third-party access authorization, in cases where an applicant has a third party submitting applications on their behalf, the following procedures must be followed. The applicant must provide in writing that they are authorizing the third party to submit applications and other information on their behalf, and the third party will need to obtain their own NCID and submit a DEQ access authorization request application with the applicant's organization address information and the third party's phone number and email address. Now we've come to the Grant Management System overview and demo, where I will tell you how to use the GMS, its tutorials, and how to submit an application. This slide has links to the GMS portal, GMS guides, and a sample application, which is found on the state agency's program webpage. Unfortunately, the state agency's application is still being finalized in the GMS, but I have some screenshots of the steps to start for starting and submitting a Level 2 application. What you see on the right is the screen where you will enter your NCID username and password to log into the GMS. After logging in to the GMS, you'll see a Division of Air Quality Grants tile in your partner applications list. After clicking that tile, you'll be taken to your GMS homepage. On your GMS homepage, you will find the link to the Daq Training Library, as well as links to create, view, and edit an application. You can see the arrow pointing to create new application, so let's continue on as if we've clicked it. After clicking the Create New Application link, you would be prompted to search through the available applications. Clicking the search button here will list the links for all open applications and is honestly easier than remembering and entering the program ID by hand. Whether you click the search button or enter in the program ID manually, either way will take you to the application. Here's where the Phase 2 Level 2 State Agency's program application will be listed. And for now, you can see the applications for other Volkswagen programs and how they appear in the results list. When the state agency's program application is available, you will be able to click on its link to view the application form. The first page of the application is where you'll enter your project information. For those who applied for Level 2 rebate in Phase 1, this should look very familiar. Thankfully, there weren't many changes we had to make to accommodate the differences in the state agency's program, but on this page you'll notice when the application is live that the only option for eligible applicant type is government. So you'll enter the information, and when you're done, you'll click Next. But before that, you have the option to click the check button to see if there's required information missing on the page before you continue. The next page of the application is where you'll enter the contact information for the project's authorized representative, the project manager, and the financial contact. These roles can be occupied by different people or the same person depending on your organization. Also, not everyone entered is required to have grants management system access from DAQ's standpoint, but at the very least, the authorized representative must be in the grants management system because they are the person certifying the application when it's submitted. In the charger detail page, you're going to enter the requested information for any chargers being installed at the project location. The full list of requirements for a qualifying Level 2 project are found in the RFP, but for this tab, please remember that a project requires a minimum of 2 ports and at least 1 designated and clearly marked EV parking space per port. Also, each charger must provide at least 6.6 kilowatts of charging power and have a minimum 5-year warranty for equipment and service. In the active application, you'll see an Add Charger button in the number field from the screenshot. Click that button to begin filling in the charger information fields. For multiple chargers, click that Add Chargers button as many times as necessary. So this slide shows the first big change made to the application for state agencies. In the Funding tab, you will no longer see this information found in the Phase 1 application. Instead, you will see this. Since the state agencies program awardees will have contracts and not just agreements with NCDEQ, we will require a more detailed breakdown of the project funding to be entered into the GMS. The fields to enter are charging equipment cost, engineering and design cost, warranty costs, other EVSC components, capital cost, electrical service upgrade cost, project management, and generic other costs. You will enter the project total, the requested funds, matching funds, and any other funding for each category. We also have an update to the project details page on the application. State agency's application has gone from just asking one question on this page to asking 4 questions. Each of these questions will be factored into the overall project scoring. So not only will we be asking for a general description of the project, but we will ask you to elaborate on the project's likelihood of use, the level of project readiness at the time of the application, and the long-term sustainability of the project. You will see these topics and finer aspects of what we're looking for in the scoring slides. Finally, we've arrived at the certification page of the application. Here's where the authorized representative for the organization will certify that all proposed activities will be carried out, that all money received will be utilized solely for the purposes for which it is intended, that records documenting the planning process and implementation will be maintained and submitted when requested, and that DEQ is granted access to inspect the project site and records. The 2 main options at this point are the Save and Close or the Submit buttons. If you feel like your application is complete and there are no more edits to make or information to add, you can click the Submit button. Otherwise, you can click Save and Close to come back to the application. For this demo, we'll select the Save and Close option and see what happens. Now I see that the confirmation that my application has been saved and what my application ID is. I also see a reminder that my application is not complete until all required documents have been submitted, and that there is a link to the required attachments checklist for me to reference. This is one opportunity where I can upload the required documents to the grants management system. The other would be in the grants homepage, where I can select View Applications and search for this saved application. I would enter the application ID and hit search to find my application. If I click on the application link, I will be able to view my saved information as well as navigate to the attachments section to add or remove attachments. Now, if I really did start an application and opted to save it before submitting, let's see how I would edit that application with a tutorial found in the Grants Management System Training Library. So really quick, I will transition to what it would look like if you were actually logging into the Grants Management System. You would take your NCID and password and enter it here. And like I said, right here up top, there might be other tiles, but after you're registered in the Grants Management System, you should see a Division of Air Quality Grants tile. We're going to click that tile, and for me, another window pops up. This is my personal grants management homepage, but as you can see on everyone's homepage, you have access to the DAQ Training Library. If I click my link specifically, it's going to take me to internal training, but this is an example of what the external training library would look like. In the training library, we can see various topics listed here on the left, and each topic has a video or infographic to explain how to use the grant management system features. Let me click Edit Application, and we'll watch it take us through the process. So right after clicking Edit Application, we can see that there are the steps listed. If you're more of a step-by-step person and this is all the information you need, it's all right here. Or by clicking this Try It button, we can see a video walking us through the steps directly. So I will click Try It. We get a welcome and just an acknowledgement that we're going to walk through the process of editing a previously saved application. Click play. We can see we need to click the Edit Application Form link. Here, I'll pause it really quick, is where you would enter that application ID, which is generated after you have saved and closed your application. It's definitely in everyone's best interest to record that number, especially if you are not complete with your application. But you can see in the application ID row, we will enter that application ID number. So after it's entered, you can click search. Again, I'm under the impression that if you were to click search under your personal account, even without adding the application ID, your application should still be referenced. Either way will take you to the same place in your application. But again, to be safe, always have a copy of your application ID on hand. But now we see, I'll continue, but we see that our application has come up, and we're going to click that link to go to our application. Now we'll see a partially finished application. At this point, we're going to make any necessary changes if we need to update information or if I came back to include additional attachments. But again, it says make any necessary changes to your application at this point. And when you're done, you can click Save and Close. So again, you have now saved that updated information, but you have not yet submitted it. If you were done at this point and ready to submit your application, you would go to that certification page, that last tab you'd see of the application, and click the Submit button. At that point, the application would go from your hands into my work list, and we'd be able to review your application. So that was an exploration of the GMS, its features, and the Phase 2 application. But after you gain access to the grants management system, we encourage you to log in and play around with this training library to get more comfortable with the GMS before the application is available. So now again, our training module has been completed from start to end. But again, many other opportunities to learn about the grants management system in the training library. So some tips and things to know. Please do not wait until the last week to request GMS access or to apply. Some of these steps take time getting you into the grants management system, and for anyone that applied in Phase 1, you know how long it takes to get all the required information. So we really encourage you to start this process as soon as possible. The budget information you provide should be as accurate as possible. DEQ reserves the right to partially fund awarded projects. DEQ will not accept paper, scanned, emailed, or faxed applications. All applications must be submitted in the grants management system. We will also not accept applications after the due date. Please do not sign any agreements with vendors or start any work until your contract is fully executed. If we look back and see that any work was started before the contract execution, That might be grounds to terminate the contract. And please note that application award is not a fully executed contract. So a few slides ago, I mentioned that information entered into the project details page of the application will be used to score the application. Maybe the biggest difference between Phase 1 and Phase 2 for state agencies is that this program is not a first-come, first-served program, but rather a competitive application where scoring will determine funding. This is the case with all other DAQ Volkswagen programs. So if you're familiar with the diesel or the DC fast applications, you'll know that there's a scoring criteria. There are 100 total points between 7 categories, where some categories are project dependent and some are location dependent. Let's take some time now to go over these 7 categories, starting with cost effectiveness. Cost effectiveness is the amount of Volkswagen funds requested per kilowatt charging rate times the number of charging ports. Projects are ranked and points are calculated and assigned incrementally based on rank from a maximum of 30 points for the most cost-effective to the least cost-effective. Information required in your application will be used to calculate cost-effectiveness, so please make sure that the information is present and as accurate as possible. The next aspect of your application, receiving a score, is the likelihood of use question found in the project details page. Here you will describe a significant need for the charging stations and provide the results of an employee survey which gauge interest or demand for charging stations to receive the full 10 points available. It would be best to attach any kind of survey results to the application as well. Also in the project details page is the question regarding project readiness. Project readiness is worth a total of 10 points and boils down to what extent are the key participants in the project identified and committed to the project, if the site has been identified, if the site is ready for construction, or if there is a viable make-ready plan in place. How soon does the applicant propose to install and make the station or stations operational? And is the proposed timeline sensible, reasonable, and likely to be met? Again, we recommend attaching any supporting documentation to the project that supports project readiness to your application. The last scored question in the project details page is about long-term sustainability. When answering, you will need to describe your internal workplace charging management policy that governs access, security, usage, and other issues for the project. Describing the policy and how it covers the specified topics, plus attaching the policy itself, will earn an applicant up to 10 points. Just like other North Carolina Volkswagen programs, the state agency's program is including environmental justice as a project scoring criteria. The EPA defines environmental justice as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people regardless of race, color, national origin, or income with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. An analysis was done using the 2009 American Community Survey 5-year estimates to determine environmental justice scores for North Carolina counties. The background of the analysis and the county scores are found in Appendix B of the state agency's RFP. The maximum score available for this criteria is 15 points. This Level 2 charging program will also be using county NOx and Volkswagen concentration to contribute a maximum of 15 points to a project. This criteria counts for a county's number of registered subject Volkswagen vehicles and mobile NOx emissions. Finally, the last opportunity for scoring considers if the project is in a historically under-resourced county. These are counties that have an underserved population greater than 15% and are designated as Tier 1 by the North Carolina Department of Commerce as shown in Appendix C of the state agency's RFP. Projects in these counties are eligible for the 10 points reserved for this criteria. So the perfect application can score 100 points over the 7 different scoring categories. But even if you can't get a perfect score, please don't let that stop you from applying. There is over $1 million available in this program, and I can say with full certainty that not every project funded will have a perfect score. Applicants selected for funding shall have 2 years to complete their project from the date of a signed executed contract with North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. If a project has not been completed after those 2 years, the awardee will need to request a contract extension from NCDEQ. Just like in Phase 1, there will be quarterly, annual, and final project reporting requirements on all awarded projects. The outline and additional information for these reports is found on the Volkswagen webpage. DEQ staff will perform site visits at all stations to verify installation and operation of the charging station prior to the approval of any reimbursement claim. DEQ staff must be granted access to the charging site before the site visit. So in closing, the application for the state agency's program will be available in the grants management system on April 1st, and applications for this program are due on May 31st. Between now and April 1st, there is an example Level 2 application found on the DEQ state agency's website that you can review. Please do not wait until the last minute to gain access to the grants management system and also to submit your application. Here is the timeline for the state agency's program. Please note that after May 31st, DEQ will review the applications through July, make award selections in August, and announce the awards between August and September. If there are any changes to the schedule, we will provide the update on the Level 2 website. And I've mentioned this website multiple times today. Here's the direct link to the Level 2 state agency program website. The website has the RFP and provides access to all the information that we covered today. If you have any questions, you can search the website or send an email directly to daq.nc_vwgrants@ncdnr.gov. If you are not currently on our mailing list and would like to receive email updates about the Volkswagen Settlement Program, please send an email with the word subscribe in the subject line to the daq.nc_vwgrants email address. So there are several resources and partners that worked with both DEQ and applicants in Phase 1 that you can also utilize in Phase 2. The contact information for the list you see on this slide is available on the DEQ Volkswagen website. So here are your VW program contacts for Level 2. Again, I'm Stephen Rice. My phone number and email is listed here. Brian Phillips is our supervisor and the mobile sources compliance branch supervisor. He also manages the Volkswagen program as a whole. And Robin Barrows is the Allied Program Supervisor and is in charge of Volkswagen Outreach. So that concludes the informational part of today's webinar, and now we will address questions collected in the Q&A box. Our host will now attempt to enable the raise hand feature for those who called into the webinar by phone. Pressing *3 will raise your hand, and pressing *3 again will lower your hand. All other attendees must use the Q&A box to submit their questions. I would like to remind attendees that this is not an opportunity to comment on how we've implemented the Volkswagen settlement, and the questions will need to pertain to the Level 2 state agency's program. So at this time, Volkswagen team, I am ready for any questions.
Thanks, Stephen. We've got a couple of questions already in the chat. So I will read them as they come in from attendees. So the first question is, will the presentation be available on our website later? And the answer is yes, but do you want to elaborate?
Sure. Yes, the short answer is yes. The long answer is after today, we will have the recording of the presentation and a PDF version of the slides, both available for your reference on our on that linked website, the Level 2 State Agency's website. They will be available whenever you need them. And again, if you're looking through them and still have questions, you're more than welcome to contact myself or to contact Brian.
Great. We have a couple questions here from Nicole Hensley. The first question, are there EVSE vendor constraints? Or is any vendor that aligns with the RFP criteria permitted?
That's a great question, Nicole. I had mentioned earlier in the presentation, which might have been after you asked your question, that North Carolina state government agencies are needing to use contractors approved on DOA's statewide term contract 691A. The information for that contract is found in the RFP. It's also something that you can find online. I believe that contract extends sometime into next year, but also lists all the available vendors in that contract. Again, this is DOA's contract. It's nothing that DEQ has power over. So if you have any questions about the vendors on the contract or any aspect of the contract, unfortunately, the most we would be able to do is point you in the direction of someone at the Department of Administration.
Another question from Nicole. Does the government entity have to own the charger, or can anyone as long as it's on government property?
So being a state agency program, state agencies, anything that meets the definition of state government, state agency, they will be the ultimate owners of the charger. It's either on state-owned, government-owned property, and the expectation is that it's operated and that there's a warranty coverage for the 5 years. So that ownership will go at least 5 years. If it's on leased government property, the lease must also be at least 5 years. So that 5-year point is the minimum goal that we have. But again, the ultimate owner for those 5 years will be whatever state government entity applied for the project.
Carolyn Road is asking if we can please explain the requirements for public access. Is it only when the parking lot is open? Only when the building/site is open? She notes we close our buildings and lots overnight and on Sundays.
Sure, let me go back to the slide. I can make that full screen again. The definition of public access in the RFP just requires that chargers must be accessible during the site or the attraction business hours to the general public without restriction. So, for example, the difference between public and not public would be if there's a charging station like in a general parking lot that there's no gate, someone could come up maybe not just during the hours of operation, but at any time. There's no barrier keeping someone from the charger, versus if there was a gate, if the charger was in a employee parking lot where someone from the general public just couldn't come up and charge. That would be a big difference between the public access and the not public access.
And she has a follow-up. What does networked versus non-networked mean? Do you want to elaborate there?
Sure. In phase one, we required all chargers to be networked. There's a difference in the capability that a charger has to communicate certain information to not just the user of the charger, but to the organizations doing this charging. Typically, if you want to get any data from a non-network charger, there's not a portal, an online portal to get that information. You'd have to go and possibly download it from the charger itself. Again, in phase one, we required only networked chargers, and because of the added capabilities of these chargers, the project cost was a little more expensive. And during the public comment period for phase two, we received some comments saying, hey, maybe we should consider non-network chargers. Maybe we can afford not to have that as a requirement, for the goal of putting more chargers out. Again, kind of compensating that price cut with more chargers. And after weighing the pros and cons, we thought we'd at the very least offer that option. Again, you can see here that the amount of funding is greatly different. The maximum percentage of the funding, 100 potentially, versus 60%. So it's up to each organization applying whether or not the cost difference in the reimbursement is worth the networked versus non-networked options.
Next is a question from Larry Warner. Several of the NC aquariums fall outside of the map of routes shown for recommended locations. So can they apply, or is it only for those facilities that fall on the identified map routes?
Okay, thank you for that question, Larry. I think what you're referencing when it comes to maps is what's found in the DC fast charging program. There's the main highways and interchanges that are focused on for DC fast charging. That aspect is not a requirement and not a consideration of this level 2 state agencies program. The reason for that is essentially what the two types of chargers offer. DC fast charger, which again has that requirement, is really designed to fully charge a vehicle in about half an hour. So if someone is making a cross-state trip and they need to have a quick charge so that they can get back on the road, we don't want them going too far off the highway to find that charging. And we also want that charging to be as fast as possible. For level 2, and for this program, these chargers can take a couple hours to fully charge a vehicle. They're not meant to be fast necessarily. They're meant for someone to park, to charge, and maybe to do some shopping, maybe to spend a good quality time in those aquariums. So just because the aquarium is not off the priority corridor as designated by the DC FAST program, that is not a scoring consideration for this level 2 program. So you're in the clear for there. And Larry, if you have any other questions regarding that and locations, you're more than welcome to ask now, or we can talk after today.
Thanks. And I just want to remind everyone, if you have some questions, please post them in the public chat and we'll be reading them as we go along here. The next question here is from Anthony Gray, asking, once the charging station goes live, which government agencies will regulate the charging station / inspections?
So once a charger goes live, once a project is completed, in terms of inspections, what I will do, or what someone else from the Department of Environmental Quality will do, is to go perform a site visit. The site visit is just a confirmation on our part that all of the work is done to the expectation of what's provided in the claim. And after that follow-up is done, if everything is good, you'll receive your reimbursement, and we consider that a complete project. After that, the site is officially owned by the organization, the entity that applied for the funding. So after our final site visit, we have the report requirements, but we're not coming back out on a monthly or an annual basis to check anything. The ownership and the operation falls onto the type of agency, the specific agency that applied.
A couple additional questions from Carolyn, asking first, if we pay a vendor to help us complete the grant, will that count against us since we have started working on the project, quote unquote?
Well, let me first reiterate that the application time frame extends to the end of May. So just for this question and the particulars here, if there's work started on a project that you have in mind, it will not be eligible for reimbursement. Any eligible project must have 0% startup by the time the fully executed contract is established. It needs to start from that point forward. In terms of the general aspect of the question about the vendor costs, again, part of developing an application is reaching out to vendors to get information. If there's something that the vendor is charging that goes towards your project, as long as it's in that eligible reimbursement list, then it's something that you can include in the overall cost of your project.
Next, do you have standardized language for a survey of employees, or should we make up our own?
At this time, we don't have a template or anything standardized for a survey. The goal of that criteria is just to show that there, in fact, is an internal desire for these chargers. Something that also could be considered is, a public survey. I've personally received calls saying that, so-and-so is interested in doing a project because the community is really clamoring for it. If there's any possible way to kind of get that information on paper via a survey, or these are a list of people who are saying, hey, we would love level 2 charging at this location. That's definitely stuff we would encourage you to include. So again, the short answer is we don't have any template or anything standard, but if you're able to show us, that internal or external desire for charging through a survey or through other means, we definitely encourage you to provide as much of that information as you can.
Anthony has a follow-up question to what he asked earlier. Are the charging stations regulated by any other agency, like gas stations, etc.?
No, the station is regulated by the government entity that applies for it, and The only thing really to regulate, I think, after the installation would be the cost of charging. That is completely up to the organization. You can say we're not charging. We're not forcing people to pay to utilize the charging experience, or you can say we are. That is completely up to the organization. The RFP does say that if you are going to have the option, or if you're going to have people pay to charge their vehicle, that there needs to be the ability for people to use a credit card. I'm kind of paraphrasing what the RFP says, but there are requirements for the charger itself when it comes to accepting payments. I'm pretty sure these are industry standard. That's definitely something that you should ask the vendors first, just to ensure that if you know going into this that you are going to charge people to charge their vehicles, that it meets the stated requirements in the RFP. And Anthony, if there were other aspects that you had in mind when it comes to regulating the charger, yeah, definitely include those in the Q&A, or get up with me after the presentation today.
And Stephen, there are no other questions in the Q&A right now. That was the last one.
Well, there certainly were some good questions, and I appreciate everyone that had things to ask. I hope I answered them to your satisfaction. We'll have a few more minutes. We had scheduled until 3, so I don't want to cut ourselves off early per se, but let me take us back to the contact slide just so that everyone here would be able to contact me if a question were to come up after today.
Hey, Stephen.
Yes.
This is Robin. Can you just clarify again the difference, or let me just paraphrase back to you, the difference between network versus non-networked means. So my understanding is network chargers provide the data back to the owners and operators across the whole system, whereas non-networked chargers don't provide this information unless it's downloaded from the charger. Is that a good way to say it?
Yeah, thanks, Robin. I think that's kind of how I would summarize it. I hope that's what came across when I was talking about it before. As someone that's not, in the charging industry, there might be a better definition there. I would certainly recommend you talk to the vendor if you want to weigh out the two options. They'd be able to tell you the full scope of the differences. And again, when it comes to the vendors and who to ask these questions to, there is that contract, the Department of Administration's contract, which lists the vendors there, or there's the list just one slide back from where I was. All the organizations here are very knowledgeable when it comes to level 2 charging. The majority, if not all, were involved in some number of phase 1 projects. Just a lot of good resources out there to really give you the full understanding of any aspect of the RFP, but specifically what you would be getting with a networked charger versus a non-networked charger.
Thanks.
All right, Sean, any additional questions in the Q&A?
Not at this time, no.
Okay. So even though we have more time, it's also not like me just to waste people's times. We all have stuff going on, and we all lost an hour over the weekend. So I just like to say I really appreciate everyone's attendance today, and I hope you found this webinar worthwhile. I also want to thank everyone on the Volkswagen team for their help with the presentation and with the Q&A. Definitely appreciate the work that everyone does across the board. Thank you again for your time, and we look forward to working with you soon. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.